Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to another Kepler Live. And today we get to talk Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings, and so on. So I'm very excited about that. I'm welcoming Dr. Zachary Schmoll to the stream. Hi, Zach. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'd love to get the ball rolling just by getting personal, just getting to know you and what you're up to, what brought you to Kepler. Just maybe tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So yeah, my name is Zach Schmoll. I'm a recent PhD graduate in humanities from Faulkner University. Before that, I studied apologetics at Houston Baptist, and I'm very privileged to serve as the managing editor of An Unexpected Journal, which is a quarterly journal of cultural and imaginative apologetics. Um, I'm from Vermont, so up here in the Northeast, and I've I'm a native Vermonter, which is great, and I've had the privilege of um, participating in a variety of teaching roles, but I've never quite seen something like Kepler, and I'm really excited about it. I'm excited about this model that allows teachers to really share their passion with students, and Tolkien is one of mine. So I'm hoping that maybe I can, learn alongside these great students.
Yeah, well, I mean that is what teachers do. I love the fact there's so much enthusiasm for some of my favorite things here at Kepler, and one of those favorite things is Tolkien. So I've been looking forward to this conversation. Now, continuing though, just kind of getting to know Zach Schmoll. What things are you into? Do you have any hobbies? What do you participate in outside of education?
Yeah, one of my favorite things to do outside of the classroom is I participate in a sport called power soccer. It's played by power wheelchair users around the United States, well, and around the world for that matter. I've been on the Vermont Chargers for the past 10 years. I was there right near the beginning, and we're still going strong today. Um, we've traveled as far away as Arizona. We've played teams from as far away as Brazil and Uruguay. So we've really, it's been a great opportunity. There aren't many sports opportunities for people who use power wheelchairs. So it's been great for me. And, it lets you burn off a little steam every now and then, which I love about it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Even like you're contributing back to the community by refereeing as well, right? So
Yeah, yeah. I'm actually one of very few like players who are actually referees. There's a few of us, but not many.
I can't resist what has probably been done often before. But if you guys are the Vermont Chargers and you're in power wheelchairs, there must be a lot of battery jokes.
Oh man, yes, and not entirely. Yeah, that wasn't a coincidence. Let's put it that way.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Has anyone? I have no idea how such things work. Has it ever happened on the field or on the court that a player runs out of battery?
Oh man, yes, I've had it happen to me. It's you hate it. Then they have to like push you off, and you hope that you can jump it fast enough. Oh, but oh yeah, it's fun, man. I mean, we were at nationals last year. Like one of my teammates had a tire fall off. I mean, it's
Wow.
wild. He was okay, but he wasn't going very far.
So shades of roller derby sounds like. It's actually fascinating talking to all the teachers, and because there's so many just different types of teachers, different backgrounds, all coming together on this Christian classical platform. The last teacher I spoke to was a huge sumo enthusiast, and it was not our Japanese teacher. So yeah, just all sorts of stuff out there. Well, we're really glad to have you here and to get to know a little bit about you. Now, you're teaching this course called J.R.R. Tolkien, Master of Subcreation. And I know that there's a lot loaded into that term subcreation. What do you mean by that? And how does the class explore that?
Yeah, so to try to kind of distill it down, Tolkien he talked about subcreation kind of in the context of like world building, and it fit into his theological worldview as well. That a human author is they're kind of, because they're created in the image of God, the main creator. Humans also have this creative capacity in them, so we're kind of like small makers or little makers, and we do it, but we do that with full recognition that we're kind of executing these faculties, and we're kind of trying to emulate as best we can the creation that God did and gave us the ability to do. So it's kind of a term of privilege for humanity, but also humility, that we realize our place in the created order.
Yeah, and this idea of being sub-creators, that's one that Dorothy Sayers certainly unpacks in The Mind of the Maker, and I think it's an idea that in one capacity or another, a lot of Christian thinkers have engaged with. But I can see how building a house or planting a garden or making a baby is an act of sub-creation. That level of responsibility and engagement that you're hinting at, is it important for a work of literature, for a work of art? Is that legitimate creation, to be creating a work of the imagination?
I do believe it is, because even in fantasy, and this it's something that Tolkien was very strong about in his essay on fairy stories that we're actually going to read during the class. But he engages with that idea of the connection between the imagination and sub-creation, and how really, like, fantasy in and of itself it's strange, right? I mean, ultimately, it's unlike our world, and there are wizards and dwarves and elves and things of that nature. Well, hobbits, of course. But there needs to be like this consistency with reality, so that it's like believable and so it's credible, because we've all read like bad fantasy before. And when you read bad fantasy, you almost write it off because the characters feel artificial, or the plot feels artificial, or the place is just unbelievable. And yet there's kind of this connection, and it's really why I talked about Tolkien being the master of sub-creation, because you feel this connection between his world and our world. And even though I know that I'm not going to find a dragon outside my house tomorrow, I understand, how Bilbo feels trying to sneak in to investigate Smog, or I'll never meet a Nazgul, but I kind of understand why Frodo was so terrified, because it's his experience at least feels consistent with reality in the way that I would respond to that reality. So I think there's a definite connection there between even fantasy, the almost unbelievable, and the real world.
Yeah, I mean, there's not. It's not the elves and the dragons that make something unrealistic. What makes it unrealistic is bad writing, right? Bad characters, bad motivations, where it just doesn't connect with the reader. So it has to jive with creation, is what you're saying. Even if there are dragons, like, it has to make sense to us.
Absolutely, you need to have kind of the same set of rules, right? We identify with these characters; they draw us in because they feel like us, or they feel. My favorite character is Sam Gamgee, and he wasn't originally my first character or my favorite character, which is interesting. Like, when I was young, it was all about like the fighting and more of the powerful heroes, right? But as I've gotten older, I'm like, Sam, I feel him now. I feel kind of the ordinary. Just, I live my life in my hometown. I live in a pretty rural town too, and Sam is clearly the defender of the Shire, as Brad Berzer calls him. So I can identify with that, but it feels real to me. Like, his personality feels like I can relate to that, and I think that's a great. It's a sign of a great work of art.
Yeah, absolutely. People praise Tolkien for his world building. That's a phrase that gets used a lot when you're talking about fantasy, whether it's something on film or it's something in a book, a world building. And when you use that phrase, suddenly you think about epic maps and pan shots, and maybe the various cultures that are built. But really, like the world building happens in the characters, and it's a sign of a truly textured world that you connect to one character in a certain phase of your life and to another in a different phase, because they were always there, fully part of the world, but now you are prepared. Before, Sam was part of the background that made it seem real for you, and now Sam is the main avenue for that reality for you. I think that just speaks to the true world building that someone like Tolkien does.
Absolutely, and I find it really interesting, because I think I think Tolkien, he kind of would identify with that in his short story, Leaf by Nigel, which you have the artist who's so focused on a leaf at first, but eventually the project is bigger and bigger. But every leaf has that detail. Like at first, it was all about the leaf, and I kind of feel like that's how my focus on this story has been. I'm reading through Lord of the Rings again right now, and like different things I never noticed before are just jumping out at me every chapter, and one of them has been Aragorn as a reluctant leader. I never thought of that before, and yet there are numerous passages, and part of that may have been clouded by kind of the movie portrayal of him. Maybe I'm kind of, ingesting that image on top of the book, but this time I'm reading it and I'm thinking, wow, he doubts himself a lot, and I can identify, it's very human. You remember times when you've doubted yourself, even this like destined prophesied king. Yeah, even if he has doubts, then you wonder. It just connects so well. I love how it does that.
Yeah, and it's an absolutely fascinating dynamic of his character to me, that he actually is sacrificing something that he prefers in order to have this greatness. It's a burden that he's willing to bear. It's not a glory that he desires for himself, and that's the dying to yourself thing that you're talking about.
Absolutely.
So I saw in your course description that one of the texts you're using is the Tolkien Reader, and you referenced one of the stories in there, I believe. But so the text for this class, which so Tolkien, master of subcreation, the main text is the Lord of the Rings, right? So not the Hobbit, not the Silmarillion, the Lord of the Rings. So I mean, that seems like an obvious choice, but I'd like you to unpack why it's the Lord of the Rings, and then maybe some examples of how we'll study world building through that work.
Sure.
I shouldn't have said world building. I meant subcreation. How we'll study subcreation.
I like it. Yeah, so I mean, I was introduced to Tolkien by The Hobbit, so that was kind of where I started from. At my elementary school, the fourth grade teacher did it as a read aloud every year. And so that was my introduction to Tolkien. So, I mean, The Hobbit, and then it was I loved it. And she didn't read The Lord of the Rings aloud to us, but she said, here, you can read them if you want to. And I did. So I think the reason we have to stick to the Lord of the Rings over The Hobbit. I mean, if any student wants to read The Hobbit, I totally recommend it. And if it would only enrich the experience, I suppose. But it's a different tale than The Lord of the Rings. It's a lot more, shall we say, lighthearted, and it's also a lot more episodic, which is interesting. So when you're in The Hobbit, right, you go from one kind of mini adventure to the next. So they meet the trolls, and then they rescue some trolls. And then we don't really hear about trolls again. Then they go to Rivendell, and then we move on. And then there's the Great Goblin and that whole episode, and then Riddles in the Dark, and all of those. And very few it's almost like a series of short adventures, time after time. And I find that when we're looking at subcreation specifically, the overarching kind of themes that run through the whole Lord of the Rings, um, for the purposes of this class, I think they're the best way to approach it. I think that it kind of gives you a better sense of the themes that Tolkien has built in under his world, and the kind of and they're in the Hobbit too, but I think they're less prevalent because it's more of the Hobbit is more of a. I mean, it was perfect the way I experienced it, read aloud to a relatively young child. It's a perfect book for more like stories. But if you want to like dig into kind of the deeper meat of it, I find the Lord of the Rings more helpful. And the Silmarillion, I mean, I would enjoy reading that too. Most people have such a hard time getting through it though. That's one of those. I actually read it last. I mean, of all of them. I read it after I finished The Lord of the Rings. And I've read it a few times myself, obviously. But I also like Tolkien more than the average person. So, I don't know if I want to. The themes are still. The Silmarillion has a lot of similar themes underlying. So that could certainly be used. And actually, at Faulkner, we had a Tolkien class taught by Dr. Jason Jewell, and he used the Silmarillion as his text, which I know that some of my classmates were a little like we would talk about it, and they say, I wonder why he didn't do Lord of the Rings, and I think because we're so familiar with it, he wanted to, help people see other sides of Tolkien. But I definitely think the Lord of the Rings, it's achievable in a semester, which is what obviously I want all of our students to be successful. But I think it's deep enough and rich enough that it will go a lot farther than. I don't think we could do a whole semester on The Hobbit, but it would be a stretch. I think we can. I think we'll have a very full semester with The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. I'm not only so much longer, but so much. It's just a different texture.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to take this moment to encourage those of you who are viewing to ask questions or make comments. I know that there are a bunch of Tolkien enthusiasts out there. So I want to talk about subcreation a little bit more and talk. And this is going to get a little geekier. So maybe for someone who's already initiated into Tolkien, but we talk about the Silmarillion, and I've read the Silmarillion. I enjoy it. But really, the part I read and reread is the creation story. And so I actually be curious, connecting this to the Lord of the Rings, to talk about subcreation through an agent like Gandalf, who's one of the Maiar. How does subcreation work within? Like, obviously, Tolkien is the subcreator. Boom, here's the Lord of the Rings. But then it seems like subcreation itself is actually a theme in the Lord of the Rings.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, that creation scene in the Silmarillion is beautiful. And also the fall is, it's tragic, but it's also beautiful. And I think what's so intriguing to me about that particular scene, and then how it relates to the rest of the narrative, is when you read the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, he talks openly in some of them that this is a religious work. But when you kind of read The Lord of the Rings, you don't necessarily feel. There are hints at kind of a transcendent power. There are hints that maybe, like the classic line that Bilbo was meant to find the ring and not by its maker, that of course causes you to wonder, okay, well then who would have that kind of power, right? Who would design that if it wasn't Sauron and it wasn't Bilbo? Then who? And it doesn't sound like chance. Gandalf denies that it's chance. So it makes you wonder, and that ties back to that creation scene in the Silmarillion where you meet, there was a creator who made music. And then there was kind of some discord added to the music. And then the music was straightened out again by enveloping that kind of off note into the even greater symphony. And so I think that when you see this creator Iluvatar. You see him kind of acting as a creator. You're right. It's a few levels of sub-creation. You have God the creator, then you have Tolkien sub-creating, and he's sub-creating a creator. um, and it's so fascinating how he chooses to do that, because uh, I think that's one of the things, and it's a theme I hope to bring out through this class for a lot of um, people. I think they read Lord of the Rings like I did originally, as a fun adventure story. As kind of, this is great and exciting, and most of it is. Granted, Tolkien describes landscapes for pages at a time, um, to the dismay of some readers who have a hard time getting through it. But you can read it just as a straightforward action story, and it does pretty well. But I'm hoping to help particular students understand these kind of undertones, these subtle, sub-creative tones, where you say, like, okay, if there is a creator in Tolkien's world, and if that creator has a hand, in helping shape certain events, and you don't see him very often, but you hear about him enough, I think there's actually great apologetic value in that. My master's degree was in apologetics, and I can't help but see how they, how it's reasonable in Tolkien's world, and it causes us to consider what might be true about our world. Now, you and I are Christians, we know that, but for non-Christians, there are different questions that might come up out of that. And I mean, finding these kind of theological themes embedded within Tolkien has been fascinating to me.
Yeah, and it's just one more of those things that one keeps noticing, right? Like you notice how Aragorn or the heroic heroes change for you, how someone like Samwise changes for you. A lot of the themes also, like just new things with every rereading. I think it's really so. I as a reader, I as a human. I mean, my world is shaped, like my real world, the world I live in, and the life I live is shaped by Tolkien. Like that's and I think it was the same experience for you as a child. Where it's like, what would Aragorn do? It's like a legitimate question in one's life, and so I hope you have success in transmitting some of that to your students. And it is such a profoundly Christian thing, as you just kind of enter into that world, even though Yahweh may not be seen. It's just such a profoundly Christian place with such profoundly Christian suppositions.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think too, I think there's, and this is something else I hope to bring into this class, is that not everyone sees it that way.
Right.
So one of the key texts that I want, so after we've read The Lord of the Rings for the first half of the semester, I want to bring in some secondary sources. I'm hoping that now that we're kind of all on a similar page, and we've at least read the stories and have our ideas about Tolkien, now we're ready. And these, I have 3 books on the syllabus. 2 of them are from a Christian perspective, and one of them, Patrick Curry's Defending Middle Earth, is not. And so he defends more of a Tolkien as a pantheist type argument, knowing that Tolkien loved Norse mythology and things like that. Right. He sees more of that influence. And also, when you read the Silmarillion, there's Iluvatar, but there are also a lot of other godlike figures in the Silmarillion. So he takes that in more of a like a pantheon of gods. But I'm hoping, because Tolkien scholarship, obviously, it's far from uniform, and so I'm hoping that maybe engaging with maybe some ideas that our students will, agree with and resonate with. I assume most of our students will resonate with like Brad Berger and J.R.R. Tolkien's Sanctifying Myth. He's a Christian author, but they might find that they actually recur too, and so I'm hoping to help guide our students through that, looking at these different perspectives on Tolkien, because it's really easy just to, like I said, just to read it as a story, as an adventure. But I'm hoping that we can get to a deeper level of engagement and just pull out. And there's a lot that Curry says that I really like, and it's a great read. Totally, I've read it a few times, and I'm looking forward to reading it again. I just think it'll be an even greater benefit for our students to critically engage with these ideas, and I hope they'll appreciate Tolkien more, that he can be examined by so many really bright people who come up with different ideas, and his work still holds up.
Yeah, it's a testimony to the depth and complexity of his work and the worth that it is to study. I actually blanked on my question. I'm just admitting it here on air that I did. Oh yes. So I was going to comment that you sound like an apologist when you're talking about the sort of level of critical engagement, but that's also just being a good literature teacher. I did want to ask you about your opening to the class. So the class begins with a work that you've already referred to, which is the introduction to fairy tales essay. Oh goodness, what is it called? On fairy stories. That's right. Could you talk a little bit about the use of that?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm hoping to use it as a foundation first, because I kind of want, as you read on fairy stories, you find Tolkien, and you find him employing a lot of the techniques on fairy stories in his own work. Just one really, really, really quick and clear example, but he's probably most well known for his term eucatastrophe. The prefix "eu" meaning good, and then catastrophe, so good catastrophe. And he denies in this essay that fairy tales are escapist, but he talks about he talks about eucatastrophe, how there's this kind of sudden turn, and you don't predict it to come, and it isn't like guaranteed to happen, and yet all of a sudden, at like the darkest point, everything kind of turns and becomes the happy ending, the consolation of the happy ending that he talks about. He compares it in later in the essay to Jesus Christ dying and then rising again. He compares it to that kind of parallel, but eucatastrophe, it doesn't have to even be related to Christianity necessarily at all as a literary tool. A eucatastrophe is just how, it's a joyful turn of events, and fairy tales do that really well. And you see that over and over and over through Tolkien. That he talks a lot about, like, he actually claimed that death was a central theme of the Lord of the Rings, which was really interesting. But despite that, I mean, Middle Earth doesn't. You don't see this falling into like utter failure and darkness. Frodo decides he's going to keep the ring, and yet he doesn't get to keep the ring because Gollum, falls into the fire with it. You see these kind of sudden twists, where it seems like all has gone wrong and the whole thing is blown up, and you see it and there are many smaller ones throughout Lord of the Rings. But anyway, so that essay is very full of kind of these literary techniques that Tolkien uses, and I'm hoping to first kind of establish some shared definitions through this essay, so that as we're reading Lord of the Rings, we can talk about it, and when we use these terms, we know what we mean.
Right. Yeah, and actually, the term eucatastrophe, which is such a brilliant term, I'd heard it used before, and read it being used in publications and on blogs, and I did not know that it was a Tolkien term. So I love how it's kind of becoming maybe a little more pervasive in certain circles. This idea of life through death, which we've touched on a couple of times now, kind of leads to a question posed by Joshua Kiefer, who says, "I've heard about subcreation in Tolkien before, and I've always wondered how central is subcreation in human nature. What role might it play in the afterlife?" A fascinating question. And what would Tolkien say? So that's a lot there. Just take on the aspects of it you'd like. I certainly think that Joshua's second question would be an entire live episode just itself. But yeah, I would love to hear you engage with this.
Yeah, well, thanks, Joshua, for the question too. This is great. So, how central is subcreation in human nature? I think it's fundamental to who humans are, and if I can go on a little bit of a biblical tangent for a minute, you see in the Garden of Eden, one of the first things that man is doing is naming the animals. It's a fundamentally creative task that we see right away, even before the fall. So I think it's creativity is something that human nature is endowed with. So I would say it's certainly central. Now we might subcreate in different ways. I'm not musical at all, but some people happen to be, and they express it that way. Some people write, some people are artists. I would even, maybe I'm a bit biased, but I would even contend that athletes can subcreate in the way that they perform their sport, in the way that they do it well. So I don't think we need to limit that term because different people have different abilities and strengths. But I do think it's central. There's a satisfaction you feel when you kind of when you do something that other people either they admire, they want to build upon, they want to emulate. Maybe as a writer, I write quite a bit, and I find that I want people to kind of come away from my work. I try not to provide blatant answers. I really try, because I would rather lead people to the answers and then they make the connection themselves. So I'm hoping to do that, and when I achieve that goal, I feel that satisfaction that I subcreated.
Right, and it's subcreation leading to subcreation.
Yeah, and I'm hoping. I don't know if it does that, but I would like it to. Yeah, the afterlife, that's a really fascinating question. I do think, just my own opinion, I do think there will certainly be creative works in the afterlife. Well, for those who enjoy the goodness of God forever, I think there will be. I think it will be a tragic place to be separated from the source of our creativity. And I think Tolkien would probably agree, and I only mention that because, for example, his Catastrophe and then on Fairy Stories, he talks a lot, kind of in the epilogue to it, about how the Gospels are a fairy story. And so I think that he would say, all right, well, God is in favor of fairy stories, therefore in heaven we'll have fairy stories. But that's the best I can take at that one.
Well, Cooper Salmon comments and asks, says, I'd never heard that death was a central theme. Are there other points in the plot that you can think of to illustrate that point?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the easiest example to explain this is the elves. So the elves are immortal, and unless they die in battle, but they're immortal in Middle-earth. And yet, all the time, they talk about leaving Middle-earth. They talk about kind of retiring. And it's fascinating when you think about that, because time doesn't impact them. And yet, they don't age. But time impacts them because of all they've seen. And elves, throughout Elrond and others, they comment how they've seen so many ages and so much suffering and so much kind of sorrow and pain. And I don't have the reference for you exactly. I I could find it easy enough for later. But Tolkien does, I believe it's in one of his letters, talk about death as a gift given to men.
Mm-hmm.
It may be the Silmarillion, but I think it's one of his
Yeah.
letters. I can't remember. But the point of that being, death is kind of the elves, you think, have it all, right? Because they're going to live forever. And yet men have this gift. And it's to die, which seems really strange. But I think that what Tolkien would say to that is they don't have to endure the suffering of the world forever. And
Yes.
yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's probably the most clear. I mean, death is the theme that's talked about throughout. You can even think about like the whole Paths of the Dead sequence and the men who are cursed. They're dead, but they can't leave until they're released. That's a fascinating sequence as well.
There are a lot of angelic figures in the Lord of the Rings, and and one of the aspects of the elves that makes me think of angels is that they in a sense they envy the relationship that men have with their creator, and the special relationship that men in Tolkien's world have with the creator is brought about by death. It allows them to have this closeness, and we think about how angels are spoken of in the New Testament and the privileged position that men have because of Jesus Christ. That we've been exalted above above the angels, and that we will judge angels, and it's a remarkable thing. And the same dynamic exists between the elves and men. The elves are greater, just objectively, but they know that at the end of history, it's actually the men who will have. And mankind who will have this special relationship. I absolutely love that. The part you were thinking of, that death is the gift of men, is actually from the Silmarillion. I Googled it while you were talking. So yeah, it's in the Silmarillion. And I think that's absolutely one of the most precious parts of Tolkien works for me. Now, this is I'm going to give everyone a last chance to get some Tolkien questions in, because we're approaching the end. I want to geek out about a separate thing, another book that we both have leafed through many times. So I want to just kind of go on this excursion. If anyone has any other Tolkien questions or comments, we'll get to those at the very end. But I want to talk about Ender's Game. I saw in your teacher profile that it's one of your favorite books. It's one of my favorite books. I'll just leave it at that. It has nothing to do with your class, but yeah. So what's up with Ender's Game?
Well, I think there's a few things about Ender that stand out specifically to me. One of them is he's a little bit different than everyone else, right? And it's one of those like coming of age stories that you see, and I love just how he wrestles with how he has to kind of work with the system that he's been given, and yet really he's kind of above the system. He's smarter than everyone. He's like this special child who's going to save the human race, and yet he has to grow into that role, and I love seeing that growth. And of course, I don't want to ruin the end, but the tragic twist is he never really that growth. He doesn't even realize when he's achieved. He doesn't.
I love how you're wrestling with spoilers.
I'm trying not to ruin the ending.
You just told everyone that Gollum jumps into Mount Doom.
Yeah, you'll learn that soon enough.
No, you're right, of course.
But no, it's a very it's just I just love how he tries to he wrestles with all these decisions that he has to make, and sometimes he doesn't even know that he's made them, and yet he has, and kind of the fallout from that. I also in Ender's Game, I mean, I love the kind of geopolitical stuff with Peter and Valentine and Locke and Demosthenes. I love that dynamic. That's they're also special children, and so it's intriguing to read how they kind of play the entire world. So I enjoy that a lot. And also, I mean, there's huge questions about the value of life all throughout Ender's Game, and that I just recently actually posted an article about that at the journal I published, and that article does entirely ruin the ending, so don't read that article if you want spoilers. But yeah, the value of life is such a huge theme.
Yeah, it is, and it's a rollicking, great adventure story. It's a relatively narrow setting, and so you get the themes and the adventure, and I love it. I am going to lobby you in the near future to teach a course. I mean, how many high school courses are there on Ender's Game? I would absolutely love to see that. I might audit that.
I would have. And I discovered it a little bit later in my life, and I wish I would have read it earlier because I think it's like a perfect late middle school, early high school book. I think it's perfect for that age range.
It is, and that's when I happened to discover it as a high schooler. It would actually be a perfect book for a middle schooler as well. It's not written for children in any way, but it's one of the things that a 12 or 13-year-old could absorb in a profitable and plenary way. I'm gonna keep waxing eloquent about it. I'm gonna stop, but I think we should make a plot to offer an elective on Ender's Game. We'll tell Scott Postma later that we made some plans without him.
I like it. Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to be able to chat with you a bit about some mutual geekdoms of ours. So J.R.R. Tolkien, Master of Sub-Creation is the course. You can see it listed out on your screen. And you can click on the link below this video, wherever you're watching, to go straight to Dr. Schmoll's profile page on Kepler and sign up for that class. Actually, I'm drawing to a close, as you can tell from my verbiage, but I failed to do one thing, which is to ask you, and you can close us out with this. Could you give us just a little thumbnail pitch? Why should I, as a high schooler, sign up for your class?
Well, I think there's a few main reasons. Number one, Tolkien is brilliant. So I think that engaging with brilliant source material is one of the greatest joys of education. So I think we have the opportunity to explore it together, and I would love to help guide that process. I think number two, this is a very writing-centric class, and I'm hoping to help students develop a kind of a technique for writing that they'll be able to utilize through even into college. So each week we're going to write short reflections. And at the end of the semester, we're going to write a research paper. Now, I'm hoping if we do this technique right, those kind of reflections will help build into that research paper. It's a technique I use now a lot more when I'm writing, and I wish I would have done it when I was younger. So I'm hoping to kind of help teach that method that I've been using more so now in a way that will benefit for the future. So there's present benefits and I hope future benefits.
Oh yeah, don't let that stop you. That was just supposed to be a little background for people to read while you went on. I'm sorry.
No problem.
But we were just talking about Scott, and he must have missed it. So we'll tell you later what we were talking about.
I was talking to Scott earlier today, actually, and I did not tip this plan to him. So
yeah, we'll tell him later. I'm so sorry I interrupted your flow. I didn't mean to do that.
No, you're great. No, but yeah, I think those are the two. I'm hoping, obviously, to build skills. It's anytime you can read Tolkien is a good time. And man, what I wouldn't have given for a high school class on J.R.R. Tolkien. So
exactly. So sign up, boys and girls.
Exactly.
All right. Well, as I said, such a pleasure. Thanks so much for hanging out, and I'm really looking forward to this fall semester.
Yeah, thanks so much.
So as we say goodbye, Zach, just feel free to stay on the line, and we can chat a little bit afterwards. So long, everybody.